Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.
Hey everyone, this is Kyle O'Connor from HR Studio Podcast. After 75 episodes, we realized how important the topic of culture is for HR leaders. So we created episode 76, Best of Culture. Listen, enjoy, and if you want to hear a little bit more on each episode, go to hrstudiopodcast.com and check out our show notes. Enjoy.
Now, this is the nation's oldest cancer center, and it's been rated number 1 or number 2 in the last over the last 25 years. So really performing at the top of their game. And when you look at Sloan Kettering, number 1, we have a simple, memorable, actionable formula for creating a connection culture. And it's just, we call it vision, value, voice. When a leader communicates an inspiring vision, values others, and gives them a voice, it makes people feel connected, so they thrive. It makes teams thrive because they feel connected. The vision at Sloan Kettering is to provide the best cancer care anywhere. And so it's very aspirational, it's very simple, it's very memorable. We call it a vision phrase, and that inspires a lot of people who work at Sloan Kettering. Secondly, we see in their culture that they value one another, and they value their patients and their patients' families. And I had a personal experience this with my wife as a 3-time cancer survivor, and I remember our first trip to Sloan Kettering, and this was when Katie, my wife, was diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer, and her chances of survival for more than 5 years were in the single digits, so less than 10%. So I was stressed, I was anxious about Katie's future, and I remember our first trip to Sloan Kettering when we were walking toward the entrance, and a doorman named Nick Medley, I know Nick now, he turned and locked his eyes on my wife and greeted her like a returning friend. Now, this is in Midtown Manhattan, Kyle, as you and I know because we live in this part of the country. Yeah. People do not make eye contact in New York City for the most part. And here's Nick standing out there locking his eyes on people he recognizes are cancer patients because they're wearing wigs. And the receptionist was calling everyone honey. I remember that. And the security people, the administrative people were helpful and friendly. And we met our oncologist, Dr. Marty Hensley. She spent an hour with us, Kyle. She educated us about the treatment options. She answered our long list of questions. And by the end of the day, I had 2 responses. Number 1, I had done my research and I knew they were one of the best teams to treat advanced ovarian cancer in the world. And I had a second reaction that day, Kyle, that really caught me by surprise, and that is I knew they cared. I could feel it. And it just made me more optimistic that maybe we would get Katie through this difficult season ahead. And earlier this year, we celebrated Katie's 12th year of being cancer-free from ovarian cancer. So, but we saw in those, that was an example. You could just see how they valued one another. I have more stories that back that up. Sloan Kettering is one of our clients now, so we do some work for them. And then finally, the third part, the value part, there are a lot of ways people value one another. Then also there's the voice part. I remember one time when Katie was receiving intraperitoneal chemo treatment, I happened across a open lounge where people were gathered to talk about the results of an employee engagement survey. Well, I couldn't believe my good fortune to be there and observe this, number 1, and it was an open lounge. But what I saw in that was people just, talking about their culture and employee engagement at Sloan Kettering. But it showed me that the institution, its leadership, were intentional about seeking the opinions and ideas and giving people a voice who worked there. And so that's just 3 quick examples. I can give you another example if you want to hear a quick story about, say, the rock band U2 is a really interesting story.
Yeah, before we go into U2, I just want to say thank you for sharing that. I mean, that story is just, it gives me goosebumps kind of what you went through, and there's so much emotion behind it too. And thank you for sharing that, and congratulations on your wife right now. That's great news. I'm glad to hear there's a happy outcome with it. I think there's a lot of value in people kind of learning from Sloan Kettering, in that you said the detail. Everyone cares. Everyone is in it to kind of help those patients, and it sounds like they created an environment where everyone's connected to the patient, and they have kind of everyone has a stake in helping them. So I think that's really valuable for our audience. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I would love to hear about U2, though. Could you please tell us about them?
Well, I have personal experience with Sloan Kettering. As I said, we're teaching workshops there now, so they're being very intentional about culture, and they would be the first to admit that they're not perfect at this. But my best clients are organizations that are usually pretty good at it because they value it and they want to be the best at it. So,
Right. Okay.
it's now I wish I could say I had firsthand experience with U2 because I think that they're a tremendous band, but I don't. But what I've learned about them is that, U2 started back in the mid-'70s, Kyle, when the band members were just 14 and 15-year-olds. And I'm sure you can relate to this since your brother is a musician too and has a band just
Yes.
playing in New York
Yep.
City, as we talked about before we got on our call. But when they started, U2 was not very good. They, surprisingly, Bono thought of himself as a punk rocker, and he tended to scream more than sing. And Adam Clayton owned a bass guitar, but he couldn't keep time, and he'd never taken lessons. So there were some serious performance problems, and it wasn't unusual that they were laughed or booed. I think they were amusing on stage, probably. But anyway, they persisted, and today they've won more Grammy Awards than any band in history. They've surpassed the Rolling Stones record for the highest revenue-producing concert tour in history, and when you look at all the awards and economic success of the band, there's no question they're one of the best rock bands in history. But what an amazing journey from a band that people laughed at to one of the best bands in history. And when you really look into their, Bono says our culture, the way we operate, is even more extraordinary than their music. And I don't know, they're both pretty extraordinary, I think.
Right.
But it's interesting that when that formula I talked about earlier, that we just call the 3V leadership model: vision, value, and voice. If you break it down, you see that in U2's culture. Bono is the de facto leader of the band. He communicates an inspiring vision. Their music is about human rights and social justice. And Bono says that we're musicians and we're performers, but we're much more than that, because these are things that matter to us, and we're trying to make the world a better place through our music and through our work and influence outside of music. And so it's not just all about the money. It's much more than that for the band, and that's made a difference. It's helped keep them together for, all their adult lives, more than 40 years now. Secondly, you see in Bono and the other band members how they value one another. Bono, first of all, he praises his fellow band members. He talks about their character. He says things, I've heard him say that, hanging around these guys just makes me a better person. And he praises the character of Adam Clayton, the bass player, and others. He also praises their task strengths, I would call them. Bono says that he's a lousy guitar player and a lousy keyboards player, but it's because of these talented friends of his. Together they bring the music he hears in his head to life. And he really, you just see in everything he does how much he values those guys, and says, we're like a family. Now, you may not find that level of connection in the workplace, but the closer you get to that, there are advantages that we're talking about here in terms of just we're hardwired to connect, and those needs have to be met or we dysfunction. Then the third part of that formula is just voice. And you see that in U2 also, that the way they make decisions, Kyle, is that if someone strongly opposes, they won't go forward with the decision. So if someone opposes and the rest of the members are all in favor of it, they'll probably go forward. But if somebody strongly opposes something, they take the time to work through their differences, or they don't do it. And Bono says it's frustrating at times, it takes more time, but we have from our experience, we believe it produces superior results. And who's to argue with them, given their incredible success? And just Other things I haven't mentioned, they've really been there for each other through tough times. When Adam Clayton developed a drug and alcohol addiction, Bono and the guys, he even showed up at a concert so stoned that he couldn't perform.
Wow.
But the guys decided they weren't going to throw him overboard, that they adopted the motto that we're all going to get through this alive. And they helped Adam overcome a drug and alcohol addiction. I love this, just a year after the band was formed, Larry Mullen Jr., the drummer, his mother was hit and killed in a car accident, and Bono reached out to him and really helped him get through a tough time. And Bono had just lost his mother a couple of years, maybe a year or two before that. So he helped him get through that. And then later on, when they got their first recording contract offer from A&M Records, which was a huge label back then,
Yeah.
there was a condition that they drop Larry, the drummer, and replace him with the more conventional drummer. But Bono told the record company executive basically to shove it.
Wow.
It's all of us or none of us.
Yeah.
We're in this together. And this was not an easy offer to turn down because,
Right.
number one, they were hurting economically. They were struggling financially. And this was one of the top labels worldwide. But he did, he really had Larry's back. And, that you just see that throughout U2's history. I've written about that in our book, Connection Culture. It's a very inspiring story about a band of guys who, unlike many other talented bands, you look at, say, the Eagles, which, phenomenal talents of the band members, but their culture became so toxic, Kyle, that they had to take a 14-year break.
Wow.
It was so bad. And they came back together, and I think they had grown a lot, so that they created a healthier culture when they got back together. But, U2 has really had a phenomenal team culture from the start, and you see it in their performance.
It's great. I love that story. I didn't know all those intricacies with U2.
And the experience we provide or co-create with them.
I like that. People experience. It's great. So your ethos here is people first. How do you maintain that as the company continues to grow so quickly?
It's a question I get a lot, actually. So I answer that question this way, which is we have an open door policy. And I don't necessarily mean this door is always open, but I mean we're always approachable, whether or not it's Gary, me, anyone else on the leadership team. I'm always texting and emailing with someone, as is Gary, which is fantastic. I do an enormous amount of one-on-ones. So while this door might be closed because I'm doing one-on-ones, I'm approachable to do the one-on-ones. Okay. And that's extremely helpful, which is taking time to listen to people, to ask them questions, whether or not it's what's the last concert they went to, or are they being challenged in a growth way with work. So I also do these things called mini town halls. So I might get 20 people together, and 14 or 15 might be brand new hires. And then I'll interlace that with people that have been here 3, 4, 5 years, and talk about our culture and talk about questions that they may have where, oh gosh, you walk into this place and it's like, oh my God, is this real? So we do that. I do lunch and learns. We use Slack quite a bit here. Okay. And Slack has been a wonderful application for us as a company that has 6 different locations. So everything, the way, quite frankly, is to create people first or maintain people first is to have high touch, and is to make sure that every single person, or as many people as I can get to in a day, knows that I'm here, knows that I care, knows that we have a team of people that care, knows that we have a CEO that puts people first.
Great.
Yeah.
So my next question, you kind of hit on this, the last response there was, a platform or tool. You talked about Slack. Give an example or two of like activity or something you've done around Slack for a group.
Well, a couple different ones. So we created a LGBT group here at Vayner for the first time ever in June, and then we created a Slack group around that. And I think that's really putting a stake in the ground.
Definitely.
When you create groups for diversity or based around diversity. Why did we do that? So that everyone feels like they can be themselves here. You know, we're only 7.5 years old and 700 plus. But our main priority is to create a place where people feel safe to be their whole selves, whomever that whole self is. So that's one way. Pierce and I laugh about this quite a bit because we also have a Dungeons and Dragons Slack channel here.
Oh, really?
We have a Soul Cycle Slack channel here. So there's often times that on that Soul Cycle channel, someone's saying, I'm going to the 7 o'clock in Chelsea. Who wants to go?
Right.
So those types of things. We also have a Count Slack channel. So if you're on the ABI, Anheuser-Busch team, they have their own, that's how they communicate.
Oh, wow.
You know, not as much email, definitely Slack. So that really helps quite a bit. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for showing those examples. I think it's really important because I think our audience, a lot of people want to think outside the box, but they just don't have the tools yet. So that's a great way of doing that. So how important is it that you, and for our audience who doesn't know who Gary Vaynerchuk is, he's the founder of this organization here, and we'll have information about him in the show notes. But how important is it that you're both on the same page, and that, and the second question to that is, have you always worked in an environment that you've had kind of that hand-in-hand relationship with, you know, the founder of the organization?
Mm-hmm. So it's essential that Gary and I are on the same page. I mean, my role as the Chief Heart Officer was created to scale him. Mm-hmm. Gary is the heart. Gary is HR. That's the foot he puts forward every single day. And so the fact that I'm here in this role is not only an honor, it's fairly essential that he and I are linked mano a mano and day to day and hour to hour. In fact, he just texted me and he said, what's interesting today? And what he's looking for is something that is a positive, maybe something that I need his advice on, maybe just something of interest. And I love that. I mean, I don't know many CEOs that just say that,
right?
You know? So being that Gary considers himself HR and heart, and certainly I do, I mean, that right there is number one. We function when we're aligned, which is most of the time, if all the time, not all the time. So I've been in other organizations where I have had very good relationships with the CEO, but they weren't VaynerMedia. Mm. They're very different. They were very much corporate. They were not independently owned. Okay. So we reported to a holding company, reported to that company. And so in many ways they were very prescriptive relationships, if you will. This is not a prescriptive relationship. And I really appreciated in those other companies, which I loved and had some wonderful years in, you know, HR was seen as a very scary thing, right? Something that you didn't really want to be a part of unless you needed a pay stub or unless you had an illness or something like that. So, you know, one person was on one side of the desk, the other person was on the other side of the desk, and if you got out of there with a smile, you had a good day. But we're different here.
It's great. I'm so guilty of that. Before I came into this whole HR consulting world, I had no idea what was involved with coaching and mentorship and, you know, all these things that are impactful for people's, not only their professional life, but their personal life. And I kind of was taking a liking to it on my own natural progression. And then once I came in and started working with this podcast, it was such a natural fit. So it's really a great point. So one thing I want to really bring to attention to our audience is VaynerMedia, and this is credit to you, Claude, and you talked a little bit about Gary too, scaling the culture and the one-on-one meetings, which is huge. Not many companies do that for all employees. Could you go into detail about how that works, the logistics of that, things like how often they occur, what you're trying to do when you meet with an employee? Do they usually initiate it, or do you? Things like that to kind of give our audience an idea of thinking outside the box of how they could really get to the heart of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. One-on-ones don't happen everywhere. And so the fact that one-on-ones are even happening with our CEO is quite something. His one-on-ones might be 5 minutes, mine are 15 minutes, maybe longer. I'm both proactive and reactive.
Okay.
So I don't know everyone here still. And so I will randomly pick about 10 people that I haven't met to meet with a day, and then I will respond to 10 others that have asked for time with me. The time that they're looking, or what they're looking for from me, is they want me to listen. Okay. When they come in and they've asked for something, they've asked for time. So listen to what's happening. Maybe it's an area that they've experienced a roadblock, or maybe it's a celebration, or maybe they just want to talk more about themselves, and this is a great place to do that in. So that's what happens when really they look to me. When I'm talking to them, I'm really just trying to explore whether or not they're getting what they need here. So it's a two-way street. They're employed here, and this is, the best agency out there, in my humble opinion. But we also need to provide them with our promise too, which is not only doing incredible and exceptional work, is being in a very vibrant culture where they are accepted. It's literally, we owe them an ear, we owe them a heart, we owe them a pathway to growth and development, to coaching. And so it's really, it's all different things we talk about. Yeah.
That's great. So it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, the physical and emotionally safe spot, because if you're in that place where you're safe emotionally and physically, you can really thrive as a professional and a human being.
Yeah. I actually believe I've kind of created some kind of an equation in my head for what I try to do every single day in terms of creating that safe space. And it starts with connecting with people. And so when you have a connection, like we just met one another, if you have a connection, that's step one, that's great. If there's some kind of empathy exchanged or trust exchange, then I'm more willing to kind of let down my guard and let you in. So connection going to trust and empathy, and then you get this incredible explosion of a relationship. And with that, anything can happen. So there are no two similar people here. There's no like for like. Everyone's different. And the fact that people come here, they feel safe enough to be themselves here. Whatever it is, one person might listen to Van Halen, and the other person's listening to Black Eyed Peas, and the other person's, listening to Jay-Z. It doesn't matter. Right. There's a common bond here. Okay. And they end up trusting each other, and that trust leads to some exceptional work.
Yeah.
Now, going back to culture and scaling culture, first off, you really specialize in, I would say, the Silicon Alley part of New York City, correct?
Yes, that's definitely where I spend most of my time. I do have a client in Toronto, but they are, again, in the ad tech space, which is such a big part of Silicon Alley. And then I have another client in tech in Boston. But again, yes, tech is the common theme.
Excellent. What really excites you, and what are you seeing happening, in particular in HR in Silicon Alley right now? I think this is a really exciting area, and it doesn't get too much publicity. There's kind of a community, and you and I were just talking about some of the networking groups that are forming here. But what are you seeing, and what really excites you about HR in this area?
Yeah, I think that there's just a renewed, appreciation, and this is even true in larger companies, that culture is this area of potential competitive advantage. There was a Deloitte study. There's a big company, and they were talking to lots of big companies when they did this work. Their annual Human Capital Trends report came out on Leap Day earlier this year, and in that they talked about how 82% of respondents in this massive survey said that culture was a source of competitive advantage, but only 19% of the respondents in the same survey felt that their organization had it right. So I think what's particularly fun about Silicon Alley and these newer tech companies is that they, number one, don't have maybe some of the baggage of older orgs who might be trying to transform their culture, which is a devilishly hard thing to do.
Right.
And they also have the appreciation, like the data is out there that you can have people take lateral comp moves even in a competitive job market to come to you because of your culture, because you're a positive, flat organization where you can make an impact, where you're valued, where you have autonomy, mastery, and purpose possibilities, like the Dan Pink trifecta. So organizations and the leadership are recognizing that yes, people will actually perform better, and they won't even be, provided they are making a market rate, they won't be overly grabby on some of the expensive extrinsic rewards, because such a high value is placed on having a positive culture.
It's great. It's really exciting to see. It's kind of, for me, my takeaway with that is it's almost like long-term versus short-term. They see the long-term effects of it versus short-term incentives and doing the right thing with the people. So that's really exciting. So to deep dive into your domain area, into culture, you talk a little bit about when you scale culture. Could you go a little bit more detail as to what you're seeing, what you're finding, and then maybe we'll go into some action items, what people could take away?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So the growth of the kind of startups and medium-sized companies that I work with, it'll have lots of inflection points along the way. And I think those are moments where you really need to take a hard look at yourself, and for the team to help you take a hard look at yourself so you scale culture the right way. And I think those inflection points will define you. You might be able to kind of run on fumes and excitement of building some new product, some disruptive technology, or whatever the case may be, or bringing a new service to market for a while, and maybe your primary focuses are on maybe building the technology, getting a couple of clients, getting that first round of funding, and it can just be a huge adrenaline rush.
Okay.
So that's, I guess, just the culture of adrenaline, and the early diehard, group that you've assembled. But before too long, and you can't rely on that maybe so much, where you'll have to scale the team, maybe bring in some outsiders to manage groups where you don't have that DNA indoors, and to hire in a way that's consistent with whatever magic you have assembled. I think studying the magic is key. So I would definitely recommend that organizations, when they're going through a major inflection point, like bringing in senior leaders from the outside, and maybe a massive wave of funding or of hiring after a round of funding comes through, that those are moments where you would serve yourself well to think about what does make you the organization that you are, and what doesn't. For example, like some of my clients, we do a values definition exercise, or an employee value proposition definition exercise. It doesn't always have to be values. It could be your manifesto, your credo, your story.
Right.
But having a real hard look at what you're good at, what your place in the world is, what you deliver to your clients, and just identifying those differentiators, and then in the process, you might be surprised about some things that you maybe have even been saying about yourself, because you were guessing and figuring it out as you went along, that aren't true.
Right.
And it's good to identify those early, because the way you get into cultural debt is by making promises that you can't keep.
Right. Okay.
So I think that scaling culture at these pivotal points, another popular one is when you hit Dunbar's number. This number around about 150 people.
Okay.
Where it's, according to this theorist Dunbar, and a lot of Silicon Alley and Silicon Valley have kind of latched onto this, is that at 150, it's really, or over that number, it's really hard to have meaningful social connections with people.
Okay.
So if you've been riding off the charisma maybe of a co-founder's or a founder with a huge vision, that begins to break as the backbone of your culture once you go above 150 employees, because it just becomes impossible for them to have a meaningful connection. So you need something else, and that could be, defining your employee value proposition. And I think the best way to do that, and is actually more and more important at different, inflection points, maybe an acquisition when you're 300 employees or whatever the case may be, your Series C, is to make it a highly collaborative process, where you're including, all the major stakeholders in defining your story, and that would certainly include the entire leadership team, all functions, and I'd also recommend representation, maybe culture champions from every function, every level, in a process like this, so you've got all the right fingerprints on there, and you don't have, a risk of maybe the senior team having a bit of groupthink about the way things used to be, and this is why we're great, and actually that was why you're great 2 years ago,
right?
But that is not.
It's irrelevant now. Yeah,
it's irrelevant now. So yeah, I guess to sum it up, I think it's really an important process to look at your culture and what you're good at and what you're not good at. Several times you might get to a steady state in an organization when you maybe have passed the Dunbar's number, and things might be kind of similar, unless you go through a massive acquisition or a CEO change or something. But you probably want to have a look at this a couple of times before you get there, just to make sure that you're making those right promises and you're not making the wrong promises as you scale, because cultural debt it's hard to get out of once you're in it.
Great point. Cultural debt. It's really important for our audience to know that term and think about it when they're planning this. So from a social anthropologist standpoint, you and I talked a little bit about this Dunbar number, 150. Could you go into detail about the Amish study a little bit? I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, yeah. So there's another Anabaptist sect, the Hutterites, very similar to Amish, Mennonites, and they have a hard stop at 150. They will break up their community and into two, and if one of those gets to 150, they will split again.
Wow.
And this number crops up in other places as well. The smallest kind of autonomous unit in many armies, many military systems for centuries, has been that company, which tops out at around 150. It's this guy Dunbar seems to be onto something where there's some studies in brain capacity as well, like your neurocortex. I'm maybe getting the medicine wrong, but
right.
Or the anatomy, but other creatures like us, monkeys, apes. They've been studied, and the size of the groups that they can kind of process and be successful in is less than 150. So go us! We have the big brains, but our breaking point is finite as well, and it seems to be around the 150 mark, where it's just becomes impossible to have those really meaningful connections with others. So yeah, it's a shame, because many of us have hundreds or thousands of Facebook friends and LinkedIn friends, connections. We think that
well, how
we're
much
so
are really
connected.
your friends,
yeah,
versus acquaintances, or someone you met on the street one day 5 years ago, and you don't remember. If you ran into them again, you wouldn't know who they were.
Yeah. We don't have as many friends as we think, Kyle.
Yes, I agree with that. Now, you talk a little bit about going back to scaling culture. What are some of the pitfalls you're finding with organizations that aren't mindful about this exercise? If they're not, careful with this, what are you finding happens? I mean, do the wheels fall off the bus? Or
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's not a disaster. If you've been selecting, kind people, smart people with pretty good EQ, you can, sometimes get away with not even maybe defining your culture for, a long time, because you've got these other compensating factors. But if you maybe make a bad hiring decision, and you hire somebody who's at odds with the culture you're trying to go for, and maybe you don't know that because you haven't defined your culture, or what it is today, then you could have if someone comes in maybe in a senior leadership role and they're, very, hard driving, or they have some quality which might be very successful in another context, but because of the way you like to treat each other, it's destructive, and then there's there might be a slow realization that maybe the senior leader has got a style that's at odds with the culture you're trying to go for, and maybe curbing innovation, or just asking people to do it their way versus giving them the autonomy to find their own path. Before you know it, you might be left with that leader, but the entire group who reported to them, who were great cultural fits, has opted out.
Okay.
So that's a challenge. So that would be a tough price to pay when you've gone from being this reputation as a great place to work, as a reputation, potentially as a place that is no fun to work.
Right.
So then you find yourself having to pay more because the reputation gets out there. Maybe your Glassdoor, scores begin to tank because sometimes people aren't comfortable confronting the issues in person. They might channel that on the social media context. But the trouble there again is that your employment brand can soon get sullied. So yeah, I think the earlier in the game you can define it, and then put infrastructure around it. I should say something more specific than that to make it actionable. So just say you define your values, and they're in a nice poster on the wall. That's probably not sufficient.
Right.
You want to have those be posted in every job spec. So candidates are saying, okay, this is what the company stands for, and maybe by definition or by process of elimination what they don't stand for. Is that me? Is that not? And hopefully you'll have a healthy amount of people, the right people, self-selecting in. And then once they're in, that should definitely, those teams should be reinforced in onboarding processes, in recognition programs, in performance evaluations. So you're always coming back to those same themes. They may be broad themes, like that you pride yourself on cultivating innovation, for example. So that there's a lot of ways you can do that in the organization. It's not going to cramp your style to have some nice broad values. I think they're actually super important and can be super empowering. So yeah, I think the infrastructure piece is super important. Every employee lifecycle moment would hopefully be influenced by what you've decided is your employee value proposition, and what is your differentiator that helps you deliver for your clients, as well as provide a great environment for talent to be attracted to you. So yeah, get it everywhere. Maybe format your all-hands meetings in the format of, here's what we're going to do for the next 6 months, and here's why it's consistent with our values. You should use that as your framework.
Now, have you ever seen, for me, I'm always a learner by doing type thing. Do you ever see organizations kind of show action with the employee value proposition? That way it's clear, or like a video, something that stands out. I'm not sure if that's something that's commonplace or no.
Yeah, so I think, you definitely want to do a multimedia approach and multi-tool approach. There's something very powerful about, say, the CEO being the one to deliver some quarterly recognition awards for the for maybe the values you've chosen, and also empowering and inclusive and visceral for it to be peer nominated versus executive team nominated. And then recording that and having that be, playing on a video screen periodically, or certainly shared with other offices in that way. I think that's a powerful thing indeed. And you'll see in organizations that have strong values, and when you go put some video maybe on your careers portal, even unscripted video, which is always nice and natural. And if you've got strong values or a strong culture, you'll see these great themes just being reflected in the conversation. They'll have each culture champion or whatever that you choose to put in your career page. They'll have their own stories based on their unique career before you, their education, their personal values. But it's kind of I guess very helpful for the organization when those unique stories from a variety of voices have this common flavor, it's like overlapping 30-40% where you keep hearing those messages coming through. It's like, yeah, this company stands for something.
It's very authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So to wrap up today, 2 more questions for you. This is really good information.
To get us started and kind of get right into it, Scott, can you talk to us about the magic of the Chick-fil-A culture, which leads to, I think it's 49 years of annual growth and exceptional employee engagement? How are you guys doing that? We have a lot to learn from Chick-fil-A.
Well, I'd be delighted to share that. And let me tell you, I think it starts with the individual that founded the company, Truett Cathy. He had opened a restaurant in 1946 and ran that one restaurant for 20 years before he created the chicken sandwich, the Chick-fil-A sandwich, and then began the chain, which is now Chick-fil-A. But what happened was, I think in the running that one restaurant, he applied lessons he'd learned as a child growing up in his mother's boarding home, as she was hosting salesmen that were coming and spending the night there. And he learned a lot about hospitality. He used to often say, people go where they're invited, they come back where they're appreciated. And so he applied that wisdom to the running of his restaurant. And then when he opened the chain, he just transferred that that DNA, if you will, into the organization that he created. And let me tell you, he did a great job of making not only customers that came into the restaurants feel appreciated, but he also made the team members that he brought on board, the staff, feel very appreciated as well.
Yeah. And so that's just a tremendous life lesson that he applied, and obviously it's the underpinning of the success of your organization. How, Scott, have you all managed to replicate that culture across so many diverse locations? That's a challenge a lot of organizations have. Is there, a practice or a best practice or something you can share with our audience that might actually give them something different to focus on? It's very unique what you guys have done.
Well, we spend a lot of time thinking about why we're in business. And we often ask ourselves, what has gotten us where we are? What are the things that were important to Truett Cathy, those lessons that we need to remember? Because Truett passed away almost 3 years ago. In 2014, September 2014, and he left the legacy and the muscle memory, if you will, in the organization to run things the way he would run them. We have a corporate purpose, which is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. That purpose is the filter through which all of our decisions are run. Is it going to represent good stewardship, and will there be a positive influence as an outcome of what we're about to do? And that's just at the heart of how we think about what we're doing as a business. We're trying to stay relevant in the marketplace, but we also realize that without the customers that we have, we wouldn't be in business. Truett knew that, and that's why he was so adamant in our being appreciative of those customers. And he says, if we appreciate them, they'll come back. And so the things that we do are geared toward being customer focused and making sure we're having a positive influence in the work that we do.
And so terms like repeatable processes and new hire training or new hire orientation, all of us in corporate America use those terms in order to further, the success of our organizations. How do you at Chick-fil-A manage your approach at so many disparate locations to ensure that new employees are onboarded and the supervisors and store managers are such that They're all kind of inculcated, if you will, into the culture so that it is repeated over and over and over. I mean, for our audience's knowledge, I mean, the annual store sales at Chick-fil-A are over $4 million, which tops every other fast food restaurant. And Chick-fil-A only operates 6 days a week. Clearly, you have shown that engaged employees and customer focus works. How do you do it? Is there any other learnings you can share with our audience, Scott? Because it's a tremendous story.
Well, whenever someone joins our organization, they go through a intensive training. There's an orientation that includes a vision and values tour, where we take everybody, put them on a bus, and we take them around to where our organization started. We go to the original Dwarf House in Hapeville, right? Wow. and we walk into the kitchen there, and we talk about the things that made that restaurant successful as it was being organized by Truett Cathy and growing through those first 20 years of its existence. And then we take some time. We actually go and visit Truett's gravesite, and we talk about the fact that his life verse was, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. And for Truett, it was not about the financial return. It was about the name that he had and the name that his company had. And so it was more important to do the right thing than maybe the most financially lucrative thing. And so as people come on board, we share those principles. We also, at every new store opening, we gather the new team members, and we have a team dinner. We often incorporate that with a dedication service that is geared toward helping introduce them to our brand. You know, what makes Chick-fil-A Chick-fil-A? We share stories of team members who have sort of embodied the principles and the values of our organization. We encourage them, we welcome them, and we make them feel like they're now part of the family. And then when the store opens, we bring in team members with experience from all over the country that will come and help train those new people. And so we're sort of sharing the history and the culture and the systems on an ongoing basis every time we open a new restaurant.
Yeah, that's terrific. Listen, you just described how you all have absolutely found a way to capture both people's hearts and minds in their contributions and their work at Chick-fil-A, which is, in essence, what most business leaders are trying to do. You all have done it. So congratulations. I mean, it's just a tremendous success story. I'm happy to say I am an ongoing patron and an admirer of your work.
Board for this coaching thing. If only everybody else in my organization was excited about coaching as I am, because I'm excited about it, but they're all like, HR initiative, kiss of death. Right. Could HR just leave us alone so we could do the real business and just they do their comp and bends or whatever HR does? And of course, if you're listening to this show, you're like, look, HR is so much more than comp and bends, and HR is one of those driving forces that build a culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. We talked about that in the previous episode. So how do you champion some of this? And the insights I've got are useful for you, but also useful for you to be a champion of coaching in your organization.
Okay, so share with us a couple things you've seen along the way that can make a difference.
Well, so because we're like, okay, coaching is actually pretty good. Why is it so hard to get traction in organizations to have managers and leaders be more coach-like? So rather than going, I've got a coaching model, so I'll just beat them over the head with it, I'm like, let's be manager-centric and ask what's their points of resistance.
Okay.
And if you do the research, and we have, the first thing they say is, look, I don't have time for this coaching stuff. I am so busy. Have you seen my inbox? Have you seen my meeting schedule? Have you seen that I'm already working 50 or 60 hours a week? I don't have time for coaching. I just got no room.
Yeah. And if coaching is something different, then they truly don't have time because they are busy.
Right. And we agree. We go, you're right. You do not have time to do coaching the way you're thinking about it, which is typically based on what they assume is executive coaching, which is like come in for an hour and have an hour-long chat with somebody.
Right.
So they go, I don't have time for 5x 1-hour chats with everybody on my team. I don't even want that. They don't even want that. And of course, at Box of Crayons, we say, look, you're right. If you can't coach in 10 minutes or less, then you don't have time for coaching.
Okay. And
in response to that, here's what they say. I still don't have time for coaching. I mean, even if I could coach in 10 minutes or less, which sounds intriguing, but even if I could, where am I going to squeeze that into my schedule? Like I said, I don't have any space. And we say, you're right, you don't have any space. You can't add coaching to what you're doing.
Right.
Because you've got no capacity, and coaching is always never quite urgent and important enough. But think of coaching as not an addition to what you're doing, but a transformation of what you're currently doing.
So not an addition, but a transformation.
Right, you're changing what you're currently doing to be more coach-like. And they're like, well, okay, that's intriguing, but look, okay, that may be true, but look, I don't want to be a coach. Like, I've met coaches. Like, there's a whole bunch of them hanging out in HR. I don't like that. They're weird. And then I keep bumping into life coaches when I go out for a glass of wine with my friends. I don't want to be a coach. I'm a normal person. And we say to them, you're right. You do not want to be a coach. Honestly, there's plenty of coaches in this world. You don't want to be a coach. You want to be more coach-like. And they're like, well, what do you mean by more coach-like? Because, I mean, that sounds okay, but I still don't really know what you're talking about, because coaching is one of those words that everybody bandies around, but nobody's exactly sure what it actually means.
Yes.
And Box of Crayons, we've got this very simple definition. Coaching is a behavior. It's, can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving just a little bit more slowly? Because most people, even HR people, are advice-giving maniacs. I mean, they love it. They love to hand over the advice. I've got the solution for you. This is how I'm adding value right now.
Yes. Well, we're there to help people, and so when we see a need, we want to fill it. But give us that definition one more time. That's good.
Thank you. Can you stay curious a little bit longer?
All right.
Can you rush to action and advice-giving just a little bit more slowly? And you know what they go, this manager who's like, okay, so I can do it fast. It's transforming what I'm doing. Okay, coaching isn't so weird. It actually feels like just a way of showing up and behaving. It's an everyday thing, so that's okay. And then they go, okay, so fifth reason I don't want to do coaching. What's in it for me? Because, look, I get that coaching is helpful for the people I'm coaching, right? Because they're more focused, they're more engaged, they're more productive. They're going to lift their game by me being more coach-like.
Sure.
And you know what? That's going to help my organization as well. Because if I've got more focused, more engaged people, more productive and more engaged, those are the two holy trinities, right? That's the thing we're after.
Yes.
Engagement, productivity. Coaching helps with all of that. Coaching elevates the culture. Coaching drives money to the bottom line. There's all sorts of good research on that. But what's in it for me? Why would I add coaching to everything I'm already doing? Because quite frankly, I've got enough on my plate.
That's right.
And here's the benefit for the people listening here, but also to the line managers, other people out there. I think being more coach-like in the end allows you to work less hard, but have more impact.
Work less hard, have more impact.
Right.
All right.
Because so much of us, this is true. I know, exactly. Because for so many of us, like, we're working really hard when we're like, I seem to be flailing, but what difference am I making here? Mm-hmm. And we all know the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. 20% of what you do has 80% of the impact. Fortunately, that means that 80% of what you're doing is basically not making much impact whatsoever.
Right.
And being more coach-like starts adjusting that, allowing you to have more impact. And you know what? There's one other barrier, which actually managers themselves don't talk about quite as much. But this is something that HR professionals and people championing coaching in their organization do talk about, which is, so how do you get people to do this?
Okay.
Because, and we talked a bit about this in the previous episode.
Our previous episode, that's right.
it's not enough to have people go, I know what the grow model is, right? Because, or whatever coaching model you happen to care about in your organization, because models are intriguing. If you're coaching nerds like you and me and people listening in, they're like, oh, I like a good coaching model. Yeah, it's like a box or a circle or a box and a circle. But actually what we care about is not knowledge, but behavior change.
Okay.
And so the final piece of the equation is, how do you help people build new habits so they can be more coach-like? And I kind of get on a soap. I mean, I'm already on a soapbox, but I'm putting another soapbox on top of my current soapbox and having a rant about this.
All right, you're a little taller.
Yeah, okay, there we go, a little taller. So much of our training, particularly in the world that we're all in, which is the so-called soft skill training, it is all about behavior change. That's the only metric that matters. And we take the easy way out by going, okay, did people like the training? Yeah, they did. Do people remember a little bit of the training? Yeah, they did. We succeeded. You didn't succeed unless people are doing things differently. So regardless of what you're teaching, regardless if it's about coaching or some other behavior change you want, here's my plea. Think about how people in your organization, in your training, will change the way they work, will build new habits. Now, I have a vested interest in this. The first chapter of the Coaching Habit book is actually about how to build habits. The good news, though, is if you go to thecoachinghabit.com, you can download the first 3 chapters of the book, so you'll get that first chapter on habits. It's only 20 pages. And that alone might be the key takeaway from this, which is build behavior change into the work you do so that people do things differently and you shift the culture. However you want to shift it, but you want to shift the culture by helping people build habits.
So as you think about any kind of a coaching, or actually in any kind of a session you're going to design for people, one of the starting points, begin with the end in mind. What habits do I want people having when they leave here?
Right. And the way we think about it is we want people to self-define 2 to 3 new habits that they work with. Because, we talked about the new habit formula in the previous episode. And if you haven't heard that, people, you should listen to that because we break that down in real detail.
Yes.
That means that you can't really prescribe habits for people other than in the most generic and not that useful way. You need people to understand the mechanics of habit building and go, okay, if I'm striving for that, this is the habit that will get me there the fastest.
Okay. Now, but so now my instructional designer, half of that brain, actually it's way less than half of my brain, I think about, so when we're building a program, though, we have to have at least a general idea of what kinds of habits we hope people will want to form based on the content we're delivering and the objectives of the business, right?
For sure. So, at Box of Crayons, we teach practical coaching skills for busy managers. We want people to be more coach-like. Be curious a little bit longer, rush to action and advice a little bit more slowly. But within that circle, I don't mind how they define the habits that will get that outcome. Okay. But for sure, you need to have that general piece. I mean, there's no point in sending them to a training and the habit they walk out with is, I'm going to eat more ice cream. That's kind of like, good, it's a habit, but it's not what we're here for.
Yes. Okay. What else can help people become more coach-like, or where are some of the good intentions go astray that might be a good help, a preview of what encounters or obstacles they can prepare for?
In the book, in one of the sections of the book, we talk about something called the drama triangle, the Karpman drama triangle. Have you come across that before, Fred?
Is it the parent-adult-child?
So it's based on parent-adult-child, which is transactional analysis.
Oh, right.
And Stephen Karpman, who developed the drama triangle, was a student of Eric Benz, who developed transactional analysis. Okay. So parent-adult-child is language that doesn't work in organizational life at all. This language does. It says, look, when things get dysfunctional, these 3 different roles play out. There's the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer.
Okay, yes.
And what's delightful about this is nobody's inherently one or the other, but we do have default roles that we like to play. Victim, whiny, complainy, it's not my fault, it's their fault, life's so hard. Persecutor, finger waggler, blamer, micromanager, I'm surrounded by idiots, it's a miracle I can get anything done. Rescuer, which obviously sounds better than the other 2, but actually is just as dysfunctional.
Okay.
Oh, I'll jump in, I'll fix this, I'll solve this, give this to me. And we bounce around all 3 of those roles all of the time, but we do have a default role that we like to play.
Okay.
And for most people, especially HR people, that default role is the rescuer.
Absolutely.
Let me jump in, let me fix it. So when you ask people, so how's that working for you? They go, it's terrible. I am exhausted. I am frustrated. I am burnt out. I've just realized that rescuers perpetuate the drama triangle. So rescuers create victims. Rescuers create persecutors.
Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.